This is an attentive audience and ready to go. Kalispera σας κυρίες και κύριοι. Αγαπητοί φίλοι, συνάδελφοι και φοιτητές. Είμαι η Bonoesco, Διευθύντρια της Αμερικανικής Σχολής. Oh, you can't hear? I think it's on. Okay. Is this better now? Okay, Glenn says good from the back. All right. I was just going to, I'm just going to go right into the English at this point since we're a little bit late, which is much the same text. Good evening. I'm Bona Westcote, the director of the American School of Classical Studies, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening for a program in celebration of our dear colleague, Andy Stewart. I also welcome those of you who are following us online, including members of Andy's family. Andy Stewart has an enormous impact on our field. He was a bold and discerning thinker, a prolific author, an accomplished archaeologist, an excellent teacher, a supportive advisor, and a wonderful colleague. He was also an excellent sailor and had a beautiful singing voice. He could have made many choices as to where he dedicated his energy, and we are so very fortunate that antiquity won the lion's share of his professional attention. I am happy to have this evening just now as summer comes to Athens. It's right around now that we could expect Andy to join us. For years during the summer, he was the touchstone at the American School and in the Athenian Agora. All who came to the school knew just where to find Andy. He could be found in the basement researching sculptural fragments in the Stoa of Attalus, lecturing for the summer programs, staying in the cooler basement of Loring Hall, and presiding over Ouzo Hour on our alumni terrace. Friends and colleagues have commemorated Andy's presence at the American School by naming a room in Loring Hall in his honor, appropriately in the basement wing that he chose as his Athenian home. Tonight we honor Andy with a double program. We will begin with a celebration with reflections about Andy from his colleagues, students, and friends, including Eric Gruen, Kristen Seaman, Rebecca Levitin, Seth Estrin, Becky Martin, and Paul Scotton. We will then have Dora Katsonopoulou and three experts in the field of Greek sculpture, Iphigeneia Leventi, Kokkorou-Alevras, and Aileen Ajoontian, present the Festschrift PΡΩΤΑΓΩΝΙΣΤΗΣ, Essays in Memory of Andrew Stewart, edited by Dora Katsonopoulou, and which has just been published. We will begin our program with Eric Gruen, Andy's colleague at Berkeley, and Kristen Seaman, one of his early students, who will join us via Zoom.
Thank you, Bona. I'm very happy to be part of this event that honors Andy. You know, Andy Stewart was a man of many parts. In addition to being widely acknowledged as among a small handful of the most distinguished scholars of Greek sculpture anywhere in the world, he was also an accomplished sailor, could be spotted skippering his sailboat on San Francisco Bay every weekend. He was also a music enthusiast. He sang in the Pacific Mozart Ensemble that performed regularly in the Bay Area and was once even nominated for a Grammy. Andy normally sang in the bass section, but on occasion was called upon to sing as baritone or tenor or even countertenor. He was also the principal cook for his household. So Andy's scholarly versatility was matched by his multifaceted personal gifts. Now, there were numerous appointments, awards, honors, and distinctions that demonstrate Andy's eminent stature in the field. I'm not going to go through them all, but I will mention only that in his last year, as capstone of his career, Andy received the coveted gold medal for distinguished achievements from the Archaeological Institute of America. And that is the highest award that is in the gift of that organization. The presentation of the gold medal was preceded by a colloquium in Andy's honor, and he made sure to thank each participant with a heartfelt but usually witty response. And his acceptance speech for the gold medal was characteristically both lighthearted and moving. Among other things, he made reference to a review of his work that once appeared in Playboy magazine and could be used as a cover for people who were reading it for other purposes. Andy's sense of humor never flagged. His puns were notorious, always eliciting appropriate groans from listeners. Now, prolific publications issued from Andy's pen or his computer there were 8 books, 2 edited volumes, more than 75 articles, and 50 reviews, plus numerous contributions to encyclopedias, dictionaries, and publications for the general reader. Now, those are awesome numbers, but numbers don't begin to tell the tale. His 2-volume work on Greek sculpture of 1990 is now generally recognized as among the most authoritative general treatments of the subject to have appeared in the last generation or more. It's a book that's notable not only for its sweeping survey of the most important surviving works, but also for the precise probing that set Greek sculpture in its social, cultural, and artistic contexts. His book, Faces of Power, Alexander's Image and Hellenistic Politics of 1993, is, to my mind, one of the most important books written on Alexander the Great in any scholarly genre in recent decades. His Art, Desire, and the Body in Ancient Greece of 1997 provides a bold and innovative approach to a broad range of material evidence in Greek art, and is informed by a variety of perspectives, including gender studies, semiotic theory, and cultural anthropology, while keeping its feet firmly planted in the empirical testimony, as Andy always was. His book, Atlas, Athens, and the Acropolis of 2004, displays not only his deft grasp of Hellenistic art, but his command of Hellenistic history and society. The book's rich study of sculptures that were dedicated by the Pergamene king on the Athenian Acropolis, it raises far-reaching questions of Hellenistic art and cultural history, also for the Roman manipulation of monuments for their own national purposes, and the role played by ancient sculptures in vigorous Renaissance discussions among artists and intellectuals, and also for the history of subsequent scholarship on ancient art and art theory. In his later years, Andy extended his reach to textbook studies, but textbooks of a very high order. His Classical Greece and the Birth of Western Art of 2008, and his Art in the Hellenistic World, an Introduction of 2014, that exhibit his extraordinary range and his ability to introduce novel ideas even while providing readable work that was intended for a wider audience. Now, those books distill Andy's characteristic approach to ancient art, that is his extensive command of the material objects, his sensitive appreciation of style, and his theoretical sophistication, while at the same time making the subject accessible on a broad front. And perhaps most impressive, after establishing himself as a foremost, maybe the foremost scholar of Hellenistic art, Andy moved into another phase of research, also of high importance. He devoted himself in his later years to intense work in the Athenian Agora on the innumerable unpublished sculptural fragments that he pieced together and analyzed. And unlike many scholars, he made his research swiftly available through a series of articles in Hesperia. The breathtaking range, the industry, and the acuity are evident throughout Andy's scholarly publications. Now, it is rare indeed for a scholar of such achievements in Greek art also to be a successful archaeologist, which requires an additional set of skills, that is, considerable energy and no small amount of managerial ability. And Andy dedicated 20 years to his work every summer as director of the UC Berkeley excavations at Tel Dor in Israel. As director, he mentored and encouraged young excavators in careful stratigraphic techniques and reconstruction. He insisted on attention to contextual analysis. That was always a central feature of his work. And as his students have noted, he knew when to step back and let his student trench supervisors make their own decisions, and when to enter the trenches himself. Now, Andy's accomplishments on the international stage did not prevent him from being an active and engaged member of his own campus community. From the time he arrived in Berkeley, he was a key member of the graduate program in ancient history and Mediterranean archaeology, the preeminent interdisciplinary program in antiquity in the country. He served as its chair for 6 years. In addition, he served as the chair of the History of Art Department for 3 years. He was curator of Mediterranean archaeology at the Hearst Museum of Anthropology for a decade. And he was a member of the Board of Trustees for the University Art Museum for 3 years. So his campus service was exemplary. And Andy's outreach, too, was notable. He was a regular consultant and advisor for exhibitions and acquisitions of ancient art at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. And I want to emphasize this. He was one of the 4 authors of the stunningly successful series of books, whose overall title was Hellenistic Culture and Society, a series that produced more than 50 volumes for the University of California Press. And I think it's not too much to say that that series helped to redefine the very field of Hellenistic studies. And by no means the least of Andy's many contributions to the university is his celebrated prowess as a teacher. His undergraduate art history courses were consistently popular, helping to earn him the university's coveted Distinguished Teaching Award in 2009. He was assiduous in the training of graduate students, rigorous and exacting in his demands, and yet deeply appreciated and praised by those who came under his tutelage. And his teaching went beyond the classroom and the seminars. Andy's hands-on methods included taking students to work with the classical antiquities in the Hearst Museum and leading expeditions of students on field trips to museums and collections in the Bay Area and beyond. For more than 40 years, graduate students and undergraduates gained invaluable firsthand experience with sculpture, pottery, terracotta figurines, and coins. And finally, on a personal note, I had the great good fortune to have Andy as a friend and colleague for over 4 decades, and I learned a lot from him. We taught joint graduate seminars in Hellenistic history and art and in Augustan history and art. And we shared a number of PhD students over the years with whom we maintained in touch thereafter. Andy's legacy is a large one. And I'm pleased and proud to be part of the celebration of the Festschrift in Andy's honor. Andy, you richly deserve all of the accolades and distinctions that your admirers can bestow. Thank you. Chris, are you on next?
I think it's my turn to go, so I will. Kalimera Sas, good morning, everyone. I was one of Andy's PhD students at Berkeley, and he ended up becoming one of my closest friends. We could talk for hours about Greek sculpture. We gossiped about the field. We discussed the advice for navigating academia that he had gleaned over the years from being chair of both Berkeley's History of Art department and its graduate group in ancient history and Mediterranean archaeology. We talked about things not related to work, such as music and Monty Python and James Bond. We grew especially close during the last year of his life, and I found his attitude and his perseverance at that difficult time inspirational. Andy would be very touched by Dora's Festschrift in this event. I know how important Greece and the school were to him. Many of my memories of Andy are associated with the school. In fact, I met him for the first time at a school garden party over 30 years ago. Before I properly made his acquaintance, his larger-than-life West Coast personality gave a clue as to who he was. Who else could he be but the person who had just compared Alexander the Great's appearance with that of Sid Vicious, the punk rocker, in his latest book? Andy often told lively stories about his student trips to Greece, which began when he was a schoolboy. As a PhD student, he was based at the British School at Athens, did dissertation research at Tegea, excavated on Crete, and started his 50-year association with the American School by joining American School trips. Ultimately, the American School became his permanent Athenian home, and he most often resided in the basement of Loring Hall. I fully grasped the extent of Andy's importance to the school community when I returned to Athens after his passing. I miss seeing him at the Agora, especially because his last Asperia article about its sculpture was a focal point of our discussions in his last months. I also sense a gaping hole in the school's social life. Andy and his puns were at the center of meals, tea, ouzo hour, and unofficial ouzo hour on the weekends. He did many kindnesses for the school community as well. When one of Loring Hall's housekeeping staff retired, he and I went shopping to buy her a fancy scarf at her favorite shop in Athens. His affection for the school staff was clear. He often lectured to the summer session. One of the hallmarks of his National Museum talk was sending the students on what he called Easter egg hunts among the details of the sculptures. and he took time to speak with students in Loring Hall. I saw his thoughtfulness over the decades. One summer, he regularly visited a student who was hospitalized. Another summer, he paid for every Ouzo hour after he found out that students were not attending because of the cost. Andy fostered that same sense of community on his excavation at Dora and at home in Berkeley, as part of his Grammy-nominated chorus, the Pacific Mozart Ensemble, as skipper of his sailboats, Obsession and Skylarking, as a member of the Berkeley Greek Club, and as a cook for guests in his kitchen. He also was a sort of academic social director for his students. He coordinated weekly Friday lunches at the Mandarin Garden restaurant near campus. He hosted Friday evening barbecues at his home. And he organized end-of-the-year oyster bakes at Heart's Desire Beach. It was at these gatherings that I got to know his wife Darlis, his children Colin and Caroline, and eventually his grandchildren. His excitement when becoming a grandfather was wonderful to see. I also met what he called a menagerie of cats. From personal experience, I can attest that the cats made house sitting for him and Darlis very challenging, despite the 15-page instruction manual that Andy had written for the purpose. That same attention to detail made him a remarkable scholar and professor. His courses were terrific. He was a great boss for his graduate student instructors. He was a careful reader of dissertations. He also modeled how to be exceptionally productive and engaged in the field. His students showed their enormous appreciation of him by successfully campaigning for him to be awarded Berkeley's Distinguished Teaching Award. They nominated him for the Archaeological Institute of America's Gold Medal, which he received shortly before he passed away. They also were instrumental in having a basement room in Loring Hall named in his memory. His students have contributed all the chapters to the book that Becky Martin and I are co-editing in his honor as well. We were able to show the table of contents to him, and he did get to see once again how much he was loved by his students. Thanks for including my memories of Andy's pedagogy in the Festschrift, and for inviting me to share today's reflections about our dear friend.
Okay. How's the volume? Good? Okay. Hi, I'm Becky Martin, and I just want to thank you all for being here this evening and putting together this lovely event. I know we're short on time, which is why the triumvirate is on the stage. So I decided this evening to speak about time, to reflect on one of the things that made Andy really special, the way he used his time. The story begins in late spring 1995. I was at college year in Athens, a student in a Greek sculpture course taught by the late Anne Stewart. One day, Anne informed us that a guest lecturer would join our class, none other than Andrew F. Stewart. We students were all curious about Andy, our only guest lecturer, but more importantly, and to no one's surprise, his lecture was amazing. I later learned it was drawn from what would be his 1997 book aforementioned, Art, Desire, and the Body in Ancient Greece. No doubt, as we've already heard, many of you also spent time with Andy in Athens, which makes this event and his named room at the school so fitting. I do want to highlight fellow Berkeley alumnus Ken LaPatten of the Getty for organizing the room donations and for being a major donor, alongside Louise Chu and Renee Dreyfus of the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, with additional support from colleagues and friends. The ribbon cutting, I believe, took place 2 years ago, fittingly in the summer. But back to that lecture. Seeing as I heard it over 30 years ago and have since read Andy's body book, as we call it, many times over, my memory of the content has grown hazy. But the way I felt about it is still fresh, which is to say I felt very inspired and honestly a little overwhelmed by its theoretical sophistication. It was at that moment I decided Andy was the person to learn from. The graduation picture is proof that the plan worked, and the STOA photo is testimony to its longevity. If we're going to talk about summers, however, we must also mention Dora, again, where Andy spent his Julys from 1986 to 2006, and where I first saw him raise his flag over the Tel. Andy, of course, published the Greek sculpture from Dora, including a 1995 chapter with a Herm of Dionysus and a Nike Acroterion that was part of my first ever article co-authored with Andy in 2003. Now, while all that seems fitting, what you might not know is how large a slice of stone sculpture these two publications represent. Here you see nearly all the pre-Roman sculpture from Dora, and the sharp-eyed will note that most of it is Egyptian or Cypriot, and I've padded this humble assemblage out with different views of some of the objects. We can agree that if Andy's goal was to excavate a site that mirrored his art historical expertise, he made a bad choice indeed. But of course, that wasn't his goal at all. Rather, he was interested in Dora precisely because, although entangled with Greek art and history, it was something different. Dora was a second site for Andy's gifts, where, as in Athens, each summer he modeled the value of hard work, of doing new things, of using time to challenge what it is you think you know. He certainly was not shy about challenging us either, and I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Seth Estrin. I was a student of Andy's at Berkeley, and it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. Like now, I'm realizing many of his other students, I first met Andy not at Berkeley, but here in Athens 20 years ago this summer. I met him, as many of you probably did, at Ouzo Hour. I was an undergraduate at the time, visiting Greece for my first visit as a member of the summer session. I could scarcely have imagined how many more times I would get to socialize with Andy over the next decade and a half, not only at many further Ouzo Hours, during the summers that I would later work with him in the Athenian Agora, but in the years that I would spend studying with him in Berkeley. There, I soon discovered Andy oversaw a strict regimen of wining and dining for his students. There was the mushu pork with pancakes every Friday at Mandarin Gardens, the barbecues that didn't always involve a barbecue at his house once a month, actual barbecuing, but of oysters, once a year at Heart's Desire Beach in Point Reyes, and once in a while there was a tropical cocktail called the Obsession, served after a trip to the Golden Gate aboard his sailboat of the same name. Besides Ouzo Hour, my other memory of Andy from that first summer is from Sunyan. There, he led us off the tourist path in search of statue bases, reconstructing, as you see on the left, the pose of one of the colossal kouroi by posing in a base himself. Here was another Andy, the one I would later encounter again and again in the seminar room, the Hearst Museum, and especially in the summers that we spent together in the dusty storerooms of the Agora, the brilliant, fiercely knowledgeable, and deeply hands-on scholar of Greek sculpture, one who truly inhabited his research, one who literally left no stone unturned. When I started at Berkeley, I was surprised how easily Andy moved from one mode to the other, from the library to Ouzo Hour. But I soon came to realize that Andy's work and his social life were not only connected, they depended on one another. Those lunches at Mandarin Gardens were where we learned about the latest gossip or the newest discoveries in the field. If it was Andy's scholarship that first brought luminaries like Tonio Holscher or François Lissarag to Berkeley, it was his hospitality that enticed them to come back again and again. And if it was an unsolved fragment in the Agora that sent us to museums and storerooms across Athens, it was Andy's social network that opened those doors. A hallmark of Andy's scholarship was its capacious, almost omnivorous quality. Every scrap of evidence was worth gathering. Every subfield of classical studies had something to contribute. Andy certainly did not agree with everyone, but he always read everyone. He always talked to everyone, and he made a point of knowing everyone. Between the storerooms and his living room, Andy built not only a legacy of scholarship, but a world of scholars. Looking back, I'm indescribably grateful that Andy let me be part of that world. And today I'm grateful that even after his passing, that world still exists. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Rebecca Levitan. I arrived at Berkeley to work with Andy as a Becky, but I learned, in Andy's words, that he already had one of those, so I became a Rebecca, and I'm still Rebecca now. It's a real honor to be here and to be part of Andy's legacy. I was his penultimate PhD student at Berkeley. I'm also the beneficiary of the Agora Student Research Assistantship that Seth initiated and worked with Andy in the Agora for 4 summers. This experience opened so many doors. It's how I know many of you in this room today. And it was my first sustained experience watching, learning, and eventually contributing to original scholarship in the field. Along the way and amidst those summers, there were other adventures, including a fateful trip to Paros for a conference. That's where I met Dora for the first time, and I served as Andy's chauffeur. Andy was a remarkable scholar not only for the quality, but also the range of his research and teaching. In this community, we often associate him specifically with Athens and the Agora, but as his students, we also know how his immense gravitational pull brought some of the best scholars working on classical art to California. And as Becky has shared, before his Athens era, Andy was a longstanding presence at Tel Dor. Of course, Andy also worked on Greek sculpture in Italy. A favorite story of his to recount was how an early article that he wrote, linking the sculpture from Sperlonga to the Emperor Tiberius, earned him a phone call from the hiring committee at Berkeley in 1979. And that he nearly didn't pick up the phone because it was a long-distance call. He was living in New Zealand at the time, so he almost missed this call. His work in Italy, including on Roman copies of Hellenistic sculpture, was influential in my own trajectory and my choice of PhD topic, one that could have only been supervised by a scholar like Andy, who didn't see a line between the work of Hellenists and Romanists, and who took a chance admitting me, a student who wasn't able to choose between the two. We've already heard a great deal about Andy's academic rigor and commitment to the field, as well as his enthusiasm. I'd like to add one other quality, which was his curiosity and desire to engage directly with ancient sculptural material and also its modern stewards. From learning modern Greek as a graduate student, dissertating in the then remote village of Tegea, to insisting that all of his students fly from San Francisco to Los Angeles to view ancient sculpture in person at the Getty Villa, Andy always favored close autopsy. And although I didn't realize it at the time, his encouragement and even expectation for his students to be bold in their own research, to arrange their own study appointments, apply for permits, and independently travel to study objects in the Apotheki or Magazzino was unique and likely the most important part of forming our own identity as scholars. So for that, I say cheers and thank you, Andy.
I think it's my turn, and I'll sit down if it's not. I'm Paul Scotton, and I'm going to give a slightly different perspective in that Andy and I were friends. And though, of course, we had academic connections, you're not hearing me? How about now? All right. Andy and I were friends, and within a year apart. So his death came rather hard to me. Anyway, others of you have done a very good job of talking about him academically, so I'm going to try a slightly different perspective, and unfortunately some of this will be a little bit repetitive, but it is so Andy, I can't let it go by unsaid, which is, Andy loved a good pun, although he was quite capable of the not-so-good pun. He was an avid sailor who enjoyed sailing on his boat in San Francisco Bay, and as has already been mentioned, his favorite sail was off from Berkeley out to the Golden Gate, turning around and then going back to the marina following the various winds and currents and tacking when needed. Andy was an avid singer, enjoyed a good glass of wine and a decent cocktail, which were often his own concoction, and perhaps most importantly, at least between the two of us, most commonly, a good meal. We became good friends over a combination of dinners in multiple locations. An infamous incident in Chicago with Chris Hallett, where Andy was nearly run over by a bus in the midst of a terrible snowstorm as he was sliding down an icy sidewalk and only just saved himself by grabbing a lamppost just before hurtling out into the street. Another notable restaurant, Commandeers in New Orleans, this with Betsy Robinson, and much laughter. And of course, here in Athens, many dinners with Robert Pitt, who has an uncanny habit of keeping your glass full. But perhaps most notable on this occasion was not only these dinners, but Andy's attendance at Ouzo Hour on the Ouzo Terrace at Loring Hall. I'll come back to that. Andy never had a formal connection with the American school. He was not on the managing committee. He did not serve on any other committees. And yet, his impact upon the school and its members was profound. He began working in earnest in the school environment in the storerooms of the Stoa of Attalus on the Greek sculpture of the Agora excavations. This became an annual summer pilgrimage, bringing a small group of Berkeley PhD students with him and providing them with hands-on experience. As significant as this experience was for his students and for all of us with the publications of several articles on their conclusions, Andy's outreach did not end with his students. Andy attended Ouzo Hour religiously as a well-earned break from another day's work, but also as a chance to not only chat with friends and colleagues, but more importantly, a chance to interact with the other students at the school. He was every bit as enthusiastic conversing with those students as he was with his own. I witnessed multiple times how eager those students were to speak with him and how he was always interested in them, their work, and offered thoughts, references, and comparanda without blinking. Andy's contribution to and support of the school's members was a significant, spontaneous contribution for him, or from him, to the mission of the school. Many of those in attendance here know this very well. Andy and I shared a fascination with the ancient world and a love for Greece. This led to annual summer mini trips around Greece to places we had never been before or places that we wanted to revisit. Andy would go on about sculpture and I would go on about architecture, and these were some of the most valuable conversations we shared. This summer camaraderie grew to the academic year at various seminars, perhaps those at the Getty being the most notable, but most enjoyably, dinners at his home at Berkeley with Darlis, his wife, and Linda, mine. Andy loved cooking, and his meals at his house began in the kitchen, chatting while Andy cooked. Andy phoned me in what I believe was the fall of 2021 to tell me that he had learned from his doctor that he had no more than 2 years to live. He had had lung issues for some time, but this prognosis was a surprise. He was quite cool about it, and immediately after we discussed it in what lay ahead, he turned to planning when we were next going to go sailing. It was a year before we had that sail, and it was notable that Andy was not at the wheel that time, but the conversation was as lively as ever. I later learned that that had been Andy's last sail. The last time we met with Andy and Darlis for dinner was about 6 weeks before he passed. We went to a restaurant that was about a half a block from their home, and had a lengthy, enjoyable, and somewhat raucous dinner. After dinner, Andy asked if I could bring my car around to pick him up because he wasn't up to walking back. When we got to his house, I helped him up the stairs to the front door, and the four of us bid each other good night and what turned out to be farewell. That was the last time we saw each other. Bana, you're not the only one. Andy, you have affected and challenged and nurtured many, many of us here. Our lives have been enriched in so many ways because of you. I am glad that you're being honored here today, but I am also so glad that we have been friends.
Thank you so much, everyone. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the second half of our program and Dora Katsonopoulou, the editor of the Festschrift ΠΡΩΤΑΓΩΝΙΣΤΗΣ, Essays in Memory of Andy Stewart. Andrew Stewart, she was very formal. Okay, she is also a prolific author, editor, and archaeologist, moving seamlessly between geoarchaeological research, scientific applications, and stylistic considerations also of classical sculpture. We know her for her extensive work connected to the island of Paros and also Helika in the northwestern Peloponnese. Amid all of this, we are very grateful she undertook to edit a Festschrift for Andy. Please join me in welcoming Dora Katsonopoulou to preside over the second half of our evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we're here tonight to celebrate for Andy, to remember Andy, a real friend, a great friend, an important person, a great scholar. After 2 years of effort, I am now very pleased. It has come to a fruition in the form of a volume dedicated to Andy, entitled ΠΡΩΤΑΓΩΝΙΣΤΗΣ, a most appropriate title, I believe, to highlight his exceptional personality and scholarly accomplishments. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the colleagues who, out of love and respect for Andy, contributed their studies to make this book. It is a volume that will serve present and future generations of scholars of Greek archaeology, in particular of ancient sculpture and art. And I want to also thank warmly the colleagues who graciously accepted my invitation to present tonight these studies included in the volume to the memory of Andy. In the order, according to the program, Iphigeneia Leventi, Georgia Kokkorou-Alevras, and Aileen Ajoontian. I also want to thank Bona Westcott and the American School of Classical Studies for organizing this celebration to honor Andy, and all those present who honor us with their presence, and thus we all join in paying tribute to the memory of Andy Stewart. I will not take any time to talk about the content of the book, as we're going to hear next about the articles included in it by the three presenters. I will just add that a full presentation of all publications of Andy are also included before the book enters into the essays dedicated to him. And just to show you the real thing, because we see it in the picture, but this is the real book. And say that the picture you see on the cover, which is a high Hellenistic amethyst from Holland, is a find that Andy cherished, really. He was very proud of presenting this at the ΠΡΩΤΑΓΩΝΙΣΤΗΣ conference dedicated to Skopas, and because I knew how much proud he was, I decided to use this in order to decorate the cover of the book, and I'm sure that he would be very pleased to see that this was his very, very much loved find. He presented it at the conference, very proud of it. And so now I will call the first, according to the program, presenter, Iphigeneia Leventi, if you please, to start presenting the group of 8 articles first, and then...
Where is the power? Ah, okay. Oh, no.
Oh, it's
Already.
Thank you, Iphigeneia.
In the following 8 articles, most contributors present studies connected to Parian marble and sculptures or post-Parthenonian Athenian sculpture. Both themes were at the forefront of the scholarly interests of the honoree, the late Andy Stewart. Professor Stewart was a great teacher to me also through both his writings and personal communication, and I'm delighted to present the following essays dedicated to him. In her article, Touches of Archaism, Hestia of Paros, by Skopas of Paros, Dora Katsonopoulou stresses first that Skopas's works are inextricably linked with pathos, namely that they are imbued with strong emotions. Back in 2016, the writer had suggested that the cult image of Hecate, created for her temple in the city of Argos by Skopas, was a possible representation of the Hecate triformis type, with archaistic threads traced back to a prototype by Alcamenes on the Acropolis of Athens. This suggestion is based on the evidence of coins and sculptural works of the Roman period from the regions of Argolid and Corinthia, like the one you see on your left. In another recent article, in 2025, Dora Katsonopoulou dealt with the marble statue of Apollos Mintheus by Skopas at the sanctuary of the god at Chrysi in the Troad. According to Strabo, the statue included the symbol from which the god's epithet was derived, that is, a mouse lying beneath Apollo's feet. An early Hellenistic coin type from Alexandria Troas, which you see in the middle, depicts the god with a mouse. In general, on coins of this Hellenistic city, Skopas' statues reproduced in an archaistic style. Further, the Apollo Palatine, mentioned by Pliny and identified with an Apollo from Rhamnus in Attica that was transferred to Rome, is another cult statue created by Skopas in a past style, incorporating 5th century features in order to maintain a religious tradition. Fragments of this statue have been recovered, while the entire image of the god is transmitted to us through Augustan coinage and Roman imperial reliefs, like the one you see on your right. Kalkani, back in 2021, traced the original source of the archaistic trend occurring to Augustan Rome back to Samothrace and the sanctuary of the great gods, and specifically to the well-known frieze from the Hall of Choral Dancers. Scopas is reported to have created the statues of Aphrodite, Pothos, and possibly also Phaethon for the sanctuary of the great gods on this island. Thus, Katsonopoulou endorses Kalkani's view that Scopas worked as both sculptor and architect of the Hall of the Dancers on Samothrace in the third quarter of the 4th century BC. Finally, the author proceeds to a reconstruction of the Hestia statue in her sanctuary inside the Prytaneon of Paros, which, according to Plinius, was made by Scopas and was transferred to Rome by Tiberius. The Prytaneon of Paros has been reconstructed by the German architect Gottfried Gruben, based on preserved architectural members incorporated into later buildings. It comprised an Ionic peristyle as well as an apse where the statue of the goddess was situated. The Prytaneon is dated to the period 375, 365 or 360, and Katsonopoulou proposed that Scopas was its architect, together with the seated Hestia attested in Roman coins and reliefs, and especially on the Sorrento base from the Augustan period on your left. These were probably early works of the sculptor on his native island. As regards the statue of Hestia, we know from coins of the city and the votive inscription, all dated to the Hellenistic period, that it bore a diadem on its head. Further, it is interesting that on a red figure pyxis in mines dated to circa 440, 420 BC, on your right, which is attributed to the Oppenheimer group, Hestia is possibly portrayed seated in the center of a wedding scene inside the temple, as indicated by the columns on both sides. The goddess holds a lit torch in her left hand and wears a diadem. On account of the three elements mentioned in diverse versions of Pliny's text, kampteras, namely columns, lampteras, that is torches, and kamiteras, accompanying women, all of which are present in the wedding scene of the pyxis from Mainz, it has been considered a possible inspirational model for the cult image by Scopas, who thus based his creation on an earlier prototype. Yiannos Kourallios presents a female-seated statue from the sanctuary of Apollo on the Despotiko. The sanctuary of Apollo, situated to the northeast of the islet of Despotiko, at the so-called Mandra region, opposite the site of Agios Georgios Antiparos, is being excavated by the archaeologist of the Ephorate of Cycladic Antiquities, now retired, and his collaborators for over 25 years. The sanctuary, one of the most important in the Aegean, also comprises an extensive secular zone. The sanctuary dates back to the late geometric period, but its thriving phase was in the 6th century BC. The temple and the Hestiatorion dining place, which have been partly reconstructed today, were built during that period. In the ongoing excavation, of the site, a marble headless statuette of a seated female has come to light. The statuette was incorporated into a wall of the so-called building Omega as building material, along with fragments of Kouroi and a headless early classical statue of a youth. Three other marble female-seated statuettes have been found on Paros, but without accurate known provenance. Moreover, the author discusses extensively the seated statues and statuettes, both male and female, of the archaic period. The female ones are the most frequently represented and come from sanctuaries like the Athenian Acropolis and the sanctuary of Phyra on Delos. Further, they are known from Attica, the Aegean Islands, and Asia Minor. Seated female figures portray deities like Hera and Cybele, but also Athena, in her monumental statue made by Endoios and exhibited today in the Acropolis Museum, as well as Artemis, a monumental statue of whom is on display in the Paros Museum. Finally, one cannot securely identify the new statuette from the Despotiko nor the three others found on Paros. We turn now to Clemente Marconi's article, Parian Sculptures in Western Sicily, the New Marble Sima from Silenus. In an earlier study back in 2021, Marconi highlighted the important contribution of Andrew Stewart to our understanding of the mobility of Parian sculptors in the Archaic and Classical periods, including those in the Western Mediterranean. Andrew Stewart argued for the contribution of Parian sculptors to architectural marble sculpture outside their home island at a number of key sites, including Silenus. Marconi himself discussed Parian marble roofs in particular, concluding that the overseas marble trade developed by the Parians by the end of the 6th century involved the shipment of semi-finished architectural elements which were reassembled and finished at their final destination by teams of sculptors accompanying the marble. A marble Sima block with a lion's head water spout is on display today in Selinunte Museo del Ballio Florio. It was found in August 2023, and the marble of the Sima has been identified as Paros II marble, a material that was very popular among the Western Greeks, e.g. in Silenus. The Sima is of considerable size and was intended for a large temple. It is half-finished and features different stages of curving on its various parts, as well as tool marks. Stylistic assessment dates the piece to the third quarter of the 5th century BC and characterizes it as an important piece from Paros. It is concluded that the Sima block arrived semi-finished in Silenus from Paros, still covered by the protective mantle and at the stage of carry dressing. The degree of carving on the lion's head and the corresponding background demonstrates how this part was subject to carving in a workshop of Silenus. The Sima block was discovered in close proximity to the harbor and an area of storage facilities. One scenario brought forward by the author is that it was brought to Silenus to serve as an example, paradigma, for a potential temple and was rejected afterwards. Alternatively, the Sima may have belonged to a temple that was never finished, even after the commissioning of a set of marble Simas and their arrival in Silenus. Daniele Castriccio focuses on Thrasimides of Paros, the Asclepius of Epidaurus, and Roman copies derived from this opus nobile. The ivory and gold statue of the god Asclepius in Epidaurus was created by the Parian sculptor Thrasimides, according to Pausanias, who also describes it fairly precisely. On the silver drachmas of Epidaurus, dated between the late 4th century and the middle of the 3rd century BC, on the reverse we found the seated statue of Asclepius above. Under the throne, we see the letters C and T, which can easily be interpreted as Thrasimides episen, Thrasimides made it, though this interpretation is not universally accepted. Further, the statue of the god by Thrasimides is illustrated on other coins of Epidaurus from Roman imperial times, as you can see below. Moreover, Castriccio revised a study by Kahn Steiner in 2022. The starting point is the 2016 edition of the Montalto album, which contains drawings of ancient sculpture and was issued in Rome around 1620. The first drawing of the album shows a seated statue of Asclepius made of Pentelic marble, now found mutilated on the Pincio Hill in Rome. The model of the seated Pincio Asclepius, according to Castriccio, could only have been the famous Epidaurian statue of the god by Thrasimides. The final part of his article is devoted to the origin of this famous statue, based primarily on numismatic evidence. A seated Asclepius appears on coins of Rhegion in the 5th century and reappears on them in the 3rd century BC. You see on your left, on your right above, whereas from the late 5th century, the Asclepius figure is replaced by a seated Apollo. A similar phenomenon occurs on coins of Taras in the 5th century BC, below on your left. The appearance of a seated Asclepius on the coins of Rhegion is corroborated by the healing waters and the Pythagorean school of medicine in this city, as well as the possible archaic roots of the Asclepius cult there and in Epidaurus according to recent evidence. Above all, the statue of Asclepius, among other statues, in a group dedicated by the regent of Rhegion, Mykithos, in Olympia between 476 and 467 BC, according to Pausanias, could possibly have served as a model for the latter statue of the god by the Parian Thrasimides. In the iconography of Asclepius' sons, Machaon and Podaleirios, votive reliefs from the Athenian Asclepieion of the south slope of the Acropolis, Jesper Ted Jensen first discusses the 5 sons of Asclepios that appear in the literary sources. The well-known and oldest sons of the god, Machaon and Podaleirios, are mentioned as early as Homer's Iliad. The other 3 sons, Aratos, Ianiskos and Telesforos, are found in later sources. Thus, they do not appear alongside the first 2 in the classical votive reliefs. Only Telesforos is attested in Athenian inscriptions of the Roman period and is usually shown in Roman monuments as a child wrapped in a mantle that covers his head and ends in a hood. Statues of Machaon and Podaleirios are reported in written sources for the Athenian Asclepieion, and surviving evidence for them exists in 2 cases, in Messene in the Peloponnese dating to the Hellenistic period, and Dion in Macedonia from the Roman period. In these monuments, they are portrayed as young and athletic, matching the appearance on the 21 Attic votive reliefs from Athens, where they are preserved. These are compiled in a separate brief catalogue at the end of the essay. The only inscription on the votive reliefs from the Athenian sanctuary that identifies one of the sons is found on the votive relief in Athens National Museum, 1364 on your left, generally, and identifies Machaon. Generally, he is the more prominent of the 2 sons in the literary record and occasionally also on the votive reliefs. On 2 reliefs, he is depicted as bearded. The author discusses the way the 2 sons are represented in relief compositions along with Asclepius and the other members of their family. They are depicted standing with short hair and usually wearing a chlamys. In one case, here on your left, a son also carries a petasos. In another, on your right, both carry staffs which are meant to be scepters. In his essay Demeter from the Athenian Eleusinion, Tonio Hölzer briefly discusses the over life-size marble head of a beautiful goddess made from Parian marble, which was allegedly discovered in Athens near the city Eleusinion and is today kept in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. The head was the subject of earlier informal discussions between the author and Andy Stewart at Berkeley. It represents a female deity with full hair pulled back around the head and tied in a knot at the nape of the neck. The back of her head is covered by a veil, which implies that she was fully clothed. We should imagine an upright standing figure turned to the left with her head almost in 3/4 view. Thus, the statue to which the head belonged was part of a cult group. The better interpretation would be a cult group of Demeter and Kori, Persephone, from the city Eleusinion of Athens, though its main temple, housing the cult statues, has not been excavated. The extant head would represent Demeter, who appears more often than Kori with her head covered and has a more matronly appearance. For the Persephone statue, Hölzer also proposes an over-life-size head in Berlin, reported to have come from Athens. This was similarly curved separately to be inserted into a statue, most probably a cult image. He dates the group to the 3rd quarter of the 4th century, which was a thriving period for the city Eleusinion, especially during the time of the Athenian politician Lycurgos. In the circle of interest of the honoree belongs also the essay The Relief Acropolis 2578, an unknown masterpiece by Raphael Jacob, who presents a relief standing female figure from the Acropolis storerooms that can be dated to the late 5th century, a period that Andrew Stewart has discussed repeatedly in a series of his articles. The author meticulously studies the female figure and underlines the rich and diaphanous drapery that points to relief figures on the Nike Temple parapet and the Erechtheion frieze, as well to statues of Aphrodite. Further, her left thigh is strongly outthrust, which indicates that her legs were crossed. Consequently, the author suggests that the figure presents a variant of the leaning type of the goddess of love, which was successful at the end of the 5th century BC and mastiko a significant freestanding sculpture, probably one of the Athenian Aphrodites of the period. Jacob further investigates the highly mannerist motive of the hand akimbo of this female figure. This gesture occurs in other creations in the round and in relief compositions, as well as vase painting, until the late 4th century and beyond. Nevertheless, it first appears in an early classical sculptural type, that of Hestia Justiniani. This motif can be associated with the work of great masters like Alcamenes, the school of Polykleitos, and not least the Parian Agoracritos. To the latter and his entourage, the author tentatively assigns the revival of this iconographical device. The motif was widely in vogue, and as the author observes, figures with this gesture seem to open a parenthesis around something central in sculptural groups as well as relief compositions. Thus, it is possible that to the left of our figure, one or more figures were depicted, and we cannot rule out the possibility that our figure was leaning to another one to her left. Finally, the late Ismini Trianti, in her article Procni and Titis Acropolis Museum, discusses the well-known statuary group of Procni and her son Itis, which is made of Pentelic marble. The group has been identified as such because Pausanias reported seeing it north of the Parthenon and stated that it was a dedication by Alcamenes. However, according to Trianti, the aforementioned position of the group does not seem to be the original one, as the very good preservation of the marble surface on the shoulders of the woman indicates that it was kept inside the building. In addition, the socket in the Acropolis rock for the insertion of the statuary group's plinth in the position indicated by Pausanias is too large to have been the original one. The myth is known in Attic vase painting, but is treated differently here. Procni, the daughter of the Athenian king Pandion, killed her son Itis along with her sister Philomela to take revenge on her Thracian husband Tyreus, who had raped Philomela. Procni's head was turned to her left, away from her son, who sought refuge in her lap and is attached to his mother at her right upper leg. Trianti further concludes that the heroine did not hold a knife in her right hand, but instead pierced the boy's hair. Her left arm was raised to her chin in a gesture of contemplation or grieving. Thus, the conflicting sentiments of the mother come to the fore rather than the atrocity of the slaughter of her son, just as Pausanias describes the group. She consequently suggests that standing figures with their legs crossed first appeared first appear in the Parthenon frieze, where it is thought that the sculptor Alcamenes worked. The sculptor also used the motif in his leaning Aphrodite statue. Hence, this stance was established in Greek sculpture of the latter 5th and 4th centuries BC. The figures of the group can be stylistically compared to the relief figures on a frieze attributed recently by Andrew Stewart to the Temple of Athena Palinis, which was transferred in Roman times to the Agora of Athens, where it was renamed as a Temple of Ares. Further, Ismini Triandi investigates the impact of the figure of Procne upon later Peplos figures, especially the Erechtheion Chorei and the Athenian women in the East Parthenon frieze, which you can see below. The group of Procne entities can be dated to the end of the decade 430-420 BC and can be assigned to the hand of Alcamenes himself due to the high quality of the workmanship. Finally, the author stresses that it may have borne political symbolism since, according to one version of the myth, Tyreus was a hero of the Megarians, and the tragic story symbolized the conflict between Athens and Megara, which was prevalent just before and during the Peloponnesian War. Thank you very much.
We thank Iphigeneia Leventi for the presentation of the 8 articles that, as you saw, referred to first the 4 first articles he presented to Paros, so that was what united those articles, and the next 4 to Athens and especially the Acropolis area. Now, Professor Georgia Kokkorou-Alevras will present a set of 6 articles that do not follow exactly the order one after another because it was selected somehow that way. So we are going to listen to her, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, with great pleasure, I will present to you 6 articles written by colleagues in memory of that great archaeologist, researcher, and teacher, Andrew Stewart. With his innovative way of looking at things and his original thinking on ancient Greek sculpture of all periods, he bequeathed us a valuable set of new ideas and interpretations. Let me begin with the article by Professor Dr. Elena Karidi. In this, the author describes the coloring of a very important I cannot change the pictures. Okay, next. In this, the author describes the coloring of a very important archaic marble statue in the type of a dressed kouros, which was found in a depository trench in the sanctuary of Apollo Dalios on Kalymnos. The excellent state of preservation, the inscription of the dedicator, Anasketos Manethike and the Catan Topolony, which is preserved on the vertical fold of the kouros himation at the front, and the deep red color in which it has been painted make this a most interesting find. The abundant remains of paint confirm the coloring technique of the archaic sculpture. As for example, in the painting of Pizza of Corinth, on the right, namely with uniform, clear and pure color layers. There are no shades in the red used, which would have emphasized and assisted the plasticity and relief of the figures. At the same time, the painting of this kouros does not follow the usual chromatic triad seen on the statuary of archaic times, namely the three basic values: dark, that is black, gray, brown, blue; light and bright, that is white, off-white, beige, skin color, yellow; and red. The author has published a lot of papers on this subject. Instead, the same dark red color is preserved more or less on all the garments worn by the young man. There is, however, a differentiation in the intensity of the red color that is preserved. In some places, it's more vivid, and in other places, it's fainter, as visible in the front and in the bundle of folds of the himation on the back. This variation is, though, probably due to the weight conditions in which the sculpture was buried for centuries. There are also few traces of red color that can be distinguished in the hair. The author, noting the absence of the usual polychromy, trichromy expected in the coloring of the archaic sculptures, you see an example at the right, concludes that probably not all creators of the archaic period so treated their works. The artist who painted the dress chorus of Kalymnos was obviously not as great and inventive as the sculptor of the statue. The next article, written by Alexander Brive here on the right, deals with the mostly marble statuettes of the late Hellenistic and Roman eras that depict the goddess Aphrodite in a wide variety of monumental statuette types, such as Aphrodite of Cnidus, Aphrodite of Capitol, Aphrodite Medici, Aphrodite Anadiomeni, emerging from the sea, Aposandalizomeni, removing her sandals, etc. These were found in many places: Athens, Corinth, Delos, Rhodos, Kos, Cyzicus, etc., and were copied mostly roughly and hastily, and in them are combined anew the original characteristic gestures and symbols of the monumental statuary types. The author believes that they were first produced on Delos, and from there they were exported to the Cyclades and to the other centers of the Eastern Mediterranean. According to Stewart, Athens became the new center of production of these figurines. Further, Alexandra Bravi comments on the effect of the nudity of Aphrodite in her various versions by gender. Based on ancient written sources and on some researchers who support the masculine perception, the male gaze in the conception and contemplation of the naked goddess in the post-classical and Hellenistic statuary types mentioned above, the author distinguishes in these nude depictions of Aphrodite, alongside the cult-religious aspect, a sensual voyeuristic tendency. In addition, she attempts to investigate a corresponding female perception, image and acts of worship of the goddess, including the nudity of the female body. In particular, she mentions the relationship the goddess had with marriage and pre-wedding preparation of girls. Indicative here is the worship of the goddess by the female population at the sanctuary of Aphrodite in Daphne and the sanctuaries of Aphrodite, Pandemos, and Aurania on the Acropolis, attested by votive offerings of a half-naked Aphrodite. Indicative is further that statuettes of Aphrodite were employed as wedding gifts. Furthermore, from the study of written sources, it emerges that women of all classes and social roles worship the goddess, virgins, wives, heterae, and mere prostitutes. Numerous are the votive offerings made by the prostitutes and courtesans of Corinth and Pompeii. It is noteworthy that statuettes of all types of Aphrodite have been found near fountains and other water-related installations in Corinth. In Roman Pompeii, moreover, statues of the goddess adorned atria, peristyles, and gardens of private houses, documenting the goddess' relationship with married women, young girls, and mistresses, as well as with abundance, fertility, and leisure. Finally, inspired by the studies of Andrew Stewart, Alessandra Bravi concludes that the nude and semi-nude depictions of the goddess generally reflect the female image and self-esteem towards the female body and ancient female eroticism. Hans Rupert Goethe, in his article, presents a head 51 centimeter high, which was detached from a statuette and carved in the renowned Parian marble Leichnades. The head's double and intense turn to the left, forward and upwards, but especially the anastole, that is, the sweeping up of the central curls of the hair above the forehead, which is a characteristic feature of Alexander the Great's hairstyle, lead to an identification with the famous king. On the other hand, the turning of the head, as described, suggests the Jason type, a sculpture from the late 4th century BC, which probably originally depicted Hermes. On the right. The latter type was also adopted by the creator of a large sculpture known from a Roman copy with the conventional name Alexander Rondanini, here at the left. Although it has been considered that it perhaps represents Achilles. Most probably then, the statuette to which the miniature head belonged depicted Alexander the Great in the Jason type. This identification, thereby, enriches the range of representations of the famous king, and the statue finally adorned most probably a wealthy Hellenistic residence. Antonio Corso discusses the Dioscuri group of Mount Quirinal, Mons Caballus at Rome. The group consists of two upright, athletic male figures in intense movement as they try to restrain the enraged horses. They have been correctly identified with the Dioscuri. The author recognizes in the figure of the one on the left structural and stylistic features which are found also in the warriors of Riace. Dated at the end of the period of the severe style and in the Parthenon sculpture. The same is observed by Corso as applicable to the original parts of the horse's head and body, which he compares with the horses of the Parthenon frieze you see in the picture. The rendering as a whole is consistent with a bronze original work of the highest quality from the third quarter of the 5th century BC. In contrast, the figure on the right of the spectator here, no, here, at the left, on the left, this figure has hair curls and expression of emotions on the face that are to be found on Praxitelian sculptures, such as the resting satyr, a marble Roman copy of a bronze work by that sculptor here at the right. Praxitelian is further the way the himation hangs off the left arm. Of particular interest are the inscriptions existing on the bases of the statues. On the base at the left can be read the inscription Opus Fidie, work of Phidias, and at the right Opus Praxitelli, of Praxiteles. Both inscriptions date back to the 5th century AD, when the statues were set up on new bases during the reconstruction of the city after its destruction in 410 AD by Alaric. The fact that the names of the two sculptures are not accompanied by an ethnic or patronymic means that they refer to the two famous sculptures of classical antiquity. Finally, he argues that the figure on the left is probably based on an original creation by Phidias, as are the horses too, but for some reason the statuary group was not completed. 60 years later, Praxiteles undertook its completion, attempting to adjust the figure on the right to the style of Phidias. The original group by the two famous sculptors was commissioned for the Anakeion in Athens. The Kyrnal group would have initially decorated the baths of Constantine in Rome. The fact that they were correctly restored to their current position shows the familiarity the Roman elite of the early 5th century AD had with the great ancient artists. Rebecca Levitan presents 4 ancient lion statues that frame the central entrance of the Venice Arsenal. The lions do not belong to the same chronological period, nor do they are of the same statuary type. According to Levitan's archival research, the 2 lions that stand on either side of the Great Gate and are dated in the 4th century BC come from the port of Piraeus. Hence the title of the author's article, Ornaments of Minerva, Ornaments of Athena. In the Piraeus port, they were reused during the late antiquity or perhaps even during the early Byzantine period. The first colossal dry matter 80 centimeter high lion, known as the Lion of Piraeus, may have originally been erected on a top of the late classical Hellenistic necropolis in the Moschaton area in Attica. The second colossal lion, known as the Hephaestion lion, today on the right of the Great Gate, was probably also a funerary monument, given its location close to the Dipylon Gate on the sacred road from Athens to Eleusis, where there existed many ancient cemeteries. The smallest statue of a lion or dog is placed at the end of the row of lions, framing the main gate of the arsenal on the right next to the canal. The oldest lion statue goes back of the ensemble, dates back to archaic times and has been restored with a head from more recent times. Here at the left. It comes from the Delian series of lions and was removed from the sacred island and transported to Venice as war booty by Admiral Andrea Pisani between 1714 to 1718. The Piraeus and Hephaestion lions, as well as the small lion or dog, were all 3 transferred to Venice by Francesco Morosini, known from his bombardment of the Acropolis in 1687. They were erected in the position they now hold as early as 1695. Certainly, all 4 were framing the Great Gate in 1741 when Michele Mariesi immortalized them. The archaeologists Elena Partida and Vasiliki Tsandila present sculptures from the archaeological collection of Thurion. In an introduction, they present in a concise way the history of the archaeological collection and the contribution the ancient local artists made to the architecture and sculpture of the region. Also discussed are the well-known and important ancient cities, the archaeological sites and monuments, culminating in a synthesis of the historical data of the area. All this comprises a valuable contribution to our knowledge. Let's now take a quick look at the sculpture. The first is a headless marble peplophorus torso of the goddess Athena, possibly offering a libation to be dated around the end of the 5th century BC. Another statue here at the left depicts Artemis in the type of Artemis from Larnaca, dating from the early Hellenistic period. Extensively described is the way the limbs of the statue were inserted into their sockets and so attached to the body, testifying the advanced technical capabilities of the sculptor. The third work is a part of a nude female upper torso, which probably belonged to a statuette of Aphrodite. No picture here. At the middle, the headless statue of a nude youth bearing a himation representing Heracles or Hermes or an idealistic portrait seems to be under the influence of Lysippus at his workshop, if not an original and youthful creation of the famous sculptor. The fragment of a male upper torso at the right may have belonged to a pendiment and is reminiscent of a depiction of Zeus or Asclepius of the 4th century to the early Hellenistic period. The headless Hermaic stele of a male figure with an himation at the right, on the right, stands upright on an inscribed base, Lysanor Timasikratos Hermei, but does not properly fit into the socket in the supporting base. Furthermore, there is a chronological difference between the inscription 3rd century BC and the sculpture 2nd century BC to the 1st century AD. Of particular quality and probably made of metallic marble, is a stele reminiscent of an Attic funerary naiskos of the second half of the 4th century BC. On the left, the dead woman is depicted seated on a diphros with her left hand in the gesture of anacalypsis or apocalypsis, characteristic of a respectable lady. The votive relief with the 3 nymphs dancing and the respectful dedicators enthroned on them and in smaller size is also dated to the 4th century BC. Here on the left. Its irregular outline, imitating a natural rock, is a type known from Attic votive reliefs of the nymphs. In another relief on the right, of uncertain use, the tired Hercules is depicted in the Farnese type created by Lysippus. A miniature partridge and a wild boar complete representation of the relief. A corner fragment of a sarcophagus on the left depicts probably a mythical battle scene. A marble sundial on the right of uncertain days bears a relief depiction of 2 satyrs in either side of a wine crater, perhaps associated with Mithraic rituals. The next sculpture is also related to the Persian sun god Mithras, protector of justice and of the Roman legions, depicting him at the moment when he plunges his knife into the neck of the bull he has subdued. There is also a headless marble statuette in the type of the head Heracleotis Amatron, as well a marble female head of the second half of the 4th century BC. Both are currently in museum abroad, together with 2 tombstones from Acarnania. In conclusion, the small size of the surviving sculptural works found in Acarnania is emphasized, but also their very likely dependence on original monumental statues. The advanced techniques observed in the attachment and insertion of parts of the statues testify to contacts with sculptures of pioneering centers of sculptures, such as Athens and the Peloponnese. It is, for instance, well known from written sources that Lysippus made a group of statues for Alesia. The existence of many ports, Paleros, Actium, Anactorium, Drimos, Echinos, Heraclea, and Alesia, facilitated these contacts. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now we are going to listen to the presentation of the last set of articles. Professor Georgia Kokkorou presented 6 articles, all dealing, as you obviously saw, with marble statuary, both in Greece and in different areas and also abroad. And now Aileen Ajoontian will present 8 articles, plus she will refer to the opening of the book Memories of Chris Seaman of Andy Stewart. Aileen, you have the...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I thank Professors Dora, Katsonopoulou, and Bono Westcott for inviting me to participate in tonight's celebration of Andy Stewart's life, scholarship, and community. Just as this Festschrift brings us together, the essays in it reveal many connections between genres, material, identity, methodology, and the art of looking that compels us to study sculpture. But we start with Dr. Chris Seaman's reminiscence of her teacher. No one except a student can articulate the experience of learning with a dynamic teacher. The title of her essay hints at, and the content confirms, that the study of ancient Greek and Roman sculpture is a multidisciplinary activity involving study, excavation, archaeological investigations, and extended discussions with many friends and students, along with a lack of fear of heights. Our exploration of the Stewart Festschrift begins with Professor Mark Wilson-Jones, who tackles an important topic that we acknowledge, but for the most part, carefully avoid: the metric proportions of ancient Greek sculpture. He applies what is known about units of measure employed in Greek architecture to statuary, suggesting that the affinities between buildings and figures drew on shared traditions of measurement, like the Doric and Attic feet, and the common dimensional ratios that architectural design favored. Analyzing the cast collection at the Archaeological Museum at Cambridge as his base sculpture group, Professor Jones goes much further, examining the way in which proportions applied to the components of a temple might also have informed the internal symmetry of statues. In both cases, at the core of ancient design was the viewer's perspective. The visual perception of symmetria and eurythmia was at the core of these monuments, and we know that the artists themselves thought and wrote about their creations in this way. Based on his findings, Professor Wilson identified several consistent ratios within sculptured bodies that produce a visually symmetrical result, but also allow for what he calls sameness yet difference. And this flexibility within a metric system must have continued into Roman times and was extended by the artists themselves. In his article, Terutics and Sculpture 1, the Archaic and Classical Periods, Dr. Anastasios Sideris points out the thematic and formal intersections of stone and metal. even suggesting that in some cases, distinguished relief sculpture in stone may have influenced small-scale metal versions. But he begins his study with other kinships between metal and stone. At Phocaea in southwestern Asia Minor, the excavation of the archaic Temple of Athena has produced large tufa, griffin, and horse protomes that may have decorated the outside wall of the temple cella. Dating to around 600 BCE, the griffin heads follow the earlier production of small bronze griffin protomes adorning the edges of bronze cauldrons. Also in the archaic period, stone versions of metal ritual fialae found their way onto architecture, like these embellishments on the lintel of the Siphnian treasure at Delphia. Perhaps this practice continued what I always thought were ornamental rosettes on the elaborate north porch of the Erechtheum could follow the archaic practice. In the classical period, the story is different. Dr. Sideris considers silver vessels, many found in Thracian contexts, reflecting a dialogue between influential relief, three-dimensional works, and small metal versions. Here is just one example, a late classical silver and gold fialae, said to be from Thrace, may quote figures from the Amazonamiki on the shield of the Athena Parthenos, which were later rendered to scale on the so-called Neoatic reliefs. Finally, there's the case of the Mazzara del Vallo bronze dancing satyr found in the sea off the southwest coast of Sicily. Its dating has fluctuated from 4th to 2nd centuries BC and has even moved into the 2nd century CE. Dr. Sideris found a close parallel in relief on a bronze amphora found in 2005 in a cemetery at Parian. Dated to the 4th century BC, the amphora depicts various Dionysiac figures. He proposes that the relief figure and perhaps the fragmentary bronze statue in the round were both inspired by another important 4th century statue. I remember standing in front of this statue with Andy Stewart when the satyr was part of a big exhibit on Praxiteles in the Louvre. We discussed this very question, focusing on Hellenistic and Roman Dionysiac figures and their origins. Which came first, three-dimensional originals or scenes in relief? Ancient identity and modern provenience are other factors connecting several essays and protagonistes. Dr. Anna Trofimova presents an over-life-size draped male sculpture found in Kersh, the ancient Greek colony Pantikapaeon, joined from two pieces found at different times and places. This statue has the distinction of being the first antiquity discovered in the northern Black Sea region to enter the Hermitage Museum. Lacking his head, which was probably one piece with the body and the feet, the original height of this marble work is estimated to have been over 3 meters. He was probably heavily bearded. Early on, the figure was identified as an image of Asclepius, but Farmakovsky, in the first scholarly publication in 1924, suggested it was probably a portrait, possibly of a Bosporan king. Bosporan kings were no strangers in Athens. They were honored by several Athenian decrees, like this one found in Piraeus, dated to 347 BC. It honors the sons of King Leucon I with gold wreaths during the Panathenea, among other things, because the king had provided grain for Athens. Other inscriptions decree that kingly portraits should be set up in the Piraeus and Athens. These texts represent the political, international trade, and agricultural realities in the 4th century BCE, and they provide a glimpse of the Bosporan monarchy when there's little other evidence. Decrees preserve not only the cordial, constructive relationships formalized by the Athenians, but also images of these international partners. Dr. Trofimova proposes that this large figure might have been one of these very kings. A small drilled hole on the side of his right leg could have supported a traditional royal staff. Another Athenian decree honors King Spartacus III during his lifetime with a bronze statue and a copy of the decree to be set up on the Acropolis. Dr. Trofimova suggests that this large statue may be a portrait of King Spartacus III himself, set up at Pantikapaon, perhaps on the Acropolis atop Mount Mithridates, reflecting the honors bestowed in Athens. Thus, the landscape, both in the Bosporus and in Athens, reflect this political relationship at a very specific time. The question of who it is compounded by another question, is it ancient? In Professor Juliana Kalkani's article, this large bronze figurine said to have come from the sea off the coast of North Africa has received lots of attention. The balding figure's distinctive physical characteristics, which may include congenital disabilities, along with his workman's exomes, diptych tucked into the belt, eyes with added silver, have generated many possible identities. Does he depict a generic artisan, the craftsman Daedalus, or the archaic poet Hipponax, or even Phidias himself? This last suggestion reveals our enduring quest to discover the personae of ancient Greek architects, creators, and designers. But Dr. Kalkani proposes that, in fact, this bronze figure is not ancient. It was produced, she said, she argues, in modern times, replicating Hellenistic images of the so-called waiting slave type, but also drawing on bona fide classical models. One side of its modern pedigree, Dr. Kalkani argues, would be the exomes knotted over the right shoulder rather than the left, in a world that always favors right-handedness, liberating the right arm for active motion. John Polini, however, suggested that the left arm was free because the man's disability enabled his left side and not the right. This small figure is a provoker, not only about identity, but also about its date. Professor Barsharar addresses bronze production techniques and a continuing scholarly controversy through another sculpture from the sea. One of several bronzes discovered in 1907 in a shipwreck off the west coast of Tunisia near Mahdia. It was found, and the contents of the Mahdia wreck, including pottery, have been carefully evaluated, producing a date for the catastrophe around 70 BCE. This herm shaft supports an archaistic head of Dionysus. The projecting boss on the right side of the shaft preserves the inscribed name of the artist Boethus of Chalcedon in Bithynia, active in the 2nd century BCE. According to Andy Stewart, statue base is inscribed with his name, with Boethus' name for portraits, can be found at Lindus and Delos, and he dates them between 184 and 126 BCE. Stewart assigned a date of around 100 BC to the Mahdia herm. Dr. Barsharar's analyzes Dionysus' elaborate headdress, revealing the complex technical method that produced it. Although it is sometimes called a turban, the adornment actually is a wide fillet piled in folds on the god's head, and in the back you can see the folded layers and Dionysus' hair showing through a gap in the middle. Barsharar also pointed out where the arrow is a surviving added grape leaf. Thus, The headdress had been even fancier, a votive fillet topped with a grapevine garland. Its complexity suggests that it was produced by direct casting with individual wax ribbons worked by hand. In 1979, the J. Paul Getty Museum acquired a bronze herm of Dionysus closely resembling the Mahdia work, and it was assumed that this work was also by Boethus. The two herms are close in scale, but the production techniques are different. The Mahdia herm was produced through the direct cast method. The Getty example was cast indirectly from molds taken from a model. And here's the crux of the technological controversy. Some specialists now believe that multiple copies of the same bronze image would have been made and generated at one time using casts taken from a master model. But Dr. Barb Sherrar resists this approach. While she agrees that the Getty herm was produced from casts actually taken from the Mahdia work, she is not sure that these casts had to be ancient. So she's not sure that these casts had to be ancient, and this is where the date of the shipwreck, around 70 BCE, is critical. The Getty herm could be perhaps Republican Roman, or it could be modern, made around 1945. Yet another spectacular bronze statue discovered in the sea is the topic of Professor Bruns Oezigen's essay. In 2005, fishermen found the fragmentary life-size torso of a male equestrian figure in the water off the coast of the Karaburun Peninsula in southwest Turkey. Now at the Çeşme Museum, the young unbearded male wore a diadem below his pointed helmet, thus suggesting his royal status. And if you look to the right, the leather straps of the cuirass in back fanned out across the now missing horse's back. The challenge of identity and dating are great, but many details of the metal cuirass, the sword, its pommel embellished with what is probably an eagle's head, and the stylistic rendering of the chlamys folds have produced clues. In addition, two other bronze equestrian figures, this is one of them, and the other one, both found in the water south of the island of Calamus, found shortly after the Karaburun work was discovered, have shed light on it. Stylistically, this bronze rider may date to the 3rd century BCE. He could be Macedonian, and he might be a member of the family of King Antiochus II at Smyrna or Miletus. The hunt for identity continues with Professor Bono Westcott's study of a Roman bronze handheld mirror in the Carlos Museum at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. The small relief scenes decorating the backs of these mirrors were seen every time their owners used them. Part of their meaning must have come from the women themselves. On the Carlos Museum Miratondo, a young man in three-quarter perspective with his back to the viewer approached the seated, partially draped woman. He holds spears in his left hand and a wreath in the right, his hunting dog at his feet. In the background stands Artemis holding a bow in her right hand while she pulls an arrow from her quiver with the other. The setting is rustic with a tree and uneven ground line. The scene on another bronze mirror in the Eskenazi Museum of Art at Indiana University employs a similarly posed youth. He stands in front of an outdoor shrine for Artemis with her statue and various offerings, including a boar's head. Behind the man is a groom controlling two rearing horses that may be yoked to a chariot. The scene is identified without much controversy as Hippolytus approaching Artemis in an outdoor setting, making her offerings. The same interpretation has been applied to the Carlos Museum mirror. The young man is Hippolytus, in the background is Artemis, and the reclining woman in front of him would be Aphrodite. The boar next to her would be one of Hippolytus' hunting trophies. Professor Westcott, however, proposes that the scene on the Carlos mirror instead presents the hero Meleager approaching Atalanta, having given her the Caledonian boar's skin after the hunt. Her patron god Artemis stands in the background at the very moment when Atalanta leaves her realm. The relationship of Meleager and Atalanta is complex. They are both hunters. She is used to chasing, and her wardrobe was unique. The Carlos Museum mirror employs figural types that appear in different contexts, as Professor Westcott demonstrates. The polyvalent seated woman could take on various mythological roles, just like her male counterpart. And here, Meleager, as a suitor, approaches Atalanta after the boar hunt. There are Roman parallels for Atalanta's pose and costume, and you see them here, this sarcophagus. And I wonder if her gesture with the right hand pulling up a fold of the mantle reflects her own role in this unusual courtship. The ultimate essay in this Festschrift pulls everything together. Professor Bintliff's study of the Valley of the Muses recognizes the sacred landscape along with the monuments and the sculptures that once populated it. The landscape itself informed the decisions of architects. In fact, wild places themselves became the focus of ritual. Ending here in the inspirational Valley of the Muses, we can go on to think a little bit more about Andrew Stewart, and I'll just say my very first time I met him, I was a graduate student here. We met in the Saloni at Loring Hall. He had pictures of a sculpture he was working on. I don't remember what it was, but I started asking questions, and he very patiently answered them for some time, and it was probably the first conversation I had had with a scholar outside my own department. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to very much thank all of the speakers today, and of course thank Andy for being the wonderful person, scholar, friend, and mentor that he was to so many of us. And I'd like to invite you all to come and share a glass of wine on his behalf. So thank you very much, and please join us downstairs for a libation.